Today I'm going to be replacing the gasket for the oil filter adapter on a 2013 Mini Cooper S. So I popped the hood up from the inside and then unlatched it from out here. Here's where the little latch is. We're going to need to remove the exhaust to get down to that little oil filter adapter. So I'm going to take this little plastic piece off first. And you can see it just fits in here, and then it slides out from these little pegs after you pop it out. So we'll just put that out of the way. So now I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this O2 sensor up here. The wire goes through here, and then it connects up here. And it just clamps in right here. And I'm gonna take it out of this to make it a little bit easier to unplug. So you just push down on the back there and then pull them apart, and it will disconnect. And now there are 6 bolts that hold this exhaust heat shield on. 3 up there, and then there's 3 down below, 1 right there, 1 down here where my finger is, and there's 1 closer to the side down there. And these are all 10 millimeter. So we're just gonna go ahead and take all these out. And before we get any further, I did want to show what I can see without taking anything off, and why I suspect that it's that gasket leaking. As you can see under here, there's coolant that is dripping down on the exhaust and down on the ground. And I found online a similar picture to this, and that was their problem. So I have already taken off the heat shield before and kind of looked around, and that's what it looks like to me. Is it's that little adapter gasket that's leaking. Now that I've got all the bolts out, we should be able to wiggle this out of here. Get this out of the way at least. Now we've got these exhaust manifold bolts to worry about. Looks like there's at least 4 on top, and then obviously there's some on bottom. I'm gonna spray some PB Blaster on them and let them it soak in for a little bit, and hopefully we don't have any of these break. But we are also going to have to disconnect everything from the turbo as well, and then the exhaust flange connection down there. Alright, so I've sprayed some PB Blaster on these 3 bolts that go to the turbo, but also the wire that goes to the O2 sensor after the catalytic converter. Looks like it runs up here into this clip right here, and it goes up to this blue thing right there. So we're going to need to disconnect this. There's another clip that it fits into. Probably need 2 hands to do this. That red thing might come up. Okay, so I got that red clip up. I was able to pull it up a little bit with my fingers and then get a screwdriver in there and pry it up the rest of the way, and then it just disconnected. So now I'm gonna go ahead and try to loosen these up, and hopefully these don't break. And these 3 bolts are 13 millimeter. Alright, I'm not sure if that's how that's supposed to come out. I think that's supposed to be a stud with a nut going on it. But it's better than it breaking. Alright, so we've got this disconnected up here. So now we need to go to the bottom and disconnect it down there. Now we've got I think it's 16 millimeter, but I don't have a 16 millimeter deep socket, so I'm going to use a 17. Looks like we've got a couple bolts up here holding the exhaust up too, right there, and then over on this other side. And I don't know, this shield might have to come off too, but I'm gonna go ahead and remove these two bolts first and see how it goes. These two bolts are gonna be 13 millimeter. So this heat shield on the bottom does need to come off. I think there's two bolts on each side, and they should be 10 millimeter as well. And some of them might be easier to get down from below, but we'll see. Okay, so I think the top two might be easier to get from up top. This one is kind of hard to see. You can't really feel it with your hand because it's in such a tight area. But I looked through this right here to see it. I don't think the light and the camera are gonna line up so we can see it through here with the camera. But it's, I was able to peek through here to be able to see it so I could get my socket on there. Alright, so I've got the heat shield detached. It's still in there. I think this all might need to come out as one, and I think it's going to be easier to drop this exhaust down from the bottom. There's that. And I think this will go down. Well, I think we can probably just leave that. No, it's gonna be easier with this out of the way. I was able to push that heat shield down through the bottom too. So now that's all that out of the way. I think we might be able to get to that adapter now. So we are gonna start messing with that. Now we're going to need to remove this bracket here, and it's held on by two 13 millimeter bolts. And now that other one is up there. This one up here is going to be a 10 millimeter. I think I'm gonna spray some PB Blaster up there and try again later. So I've been able to pry on this bracket a little bit, and hopefully that broke that top bolt loose. It also helps if you try to spin the bolt the right way to loosen it. I was trying to tighten it at first, and I got it to move and tighten it even more, so make sure you're spinning it the right way. I did break it loose. Just used the double wrench, and it broke loose. I don't know if prying on the bracket helped it. I think the thing that helped the most was trying to loosen the bolt and not tighten it. So now we need to remove these two 10mm bolts for this last heat shield and remove it. And actually that heat shield is also being held on by these two brackets that held the exhaust on, so you can probably just remove these bolts holding the heat shield up as well instead of removing the exhaust from this and drop that all with the exhaust. But so you got to remove these two bolts to get that heat shield off as well, 13mm. So now I'm gonna start getting stuff out of the way up here. Kind of get this intake tube out of the way. So this plug and this little hose disconnect as one piece. So now I need to loosen this clamp, loosen this clamp, and get this out of the way. That's out of the way. And I've got a 27mm socket on the oil filter cap. This should come out of the way, I think. The bolt on mine is missing. It looks like it probably snapped off, and they never dealt with it. So the bottom of this should pull away, and then the top should pull up. And should be able to manipulate this out of the way to get that oil filter out. Now I think we're going to need to remove this little bolt right here that holds a bunch of clips in that area. I think this is an 8mm. Yep, so 8mm. I think there's just that one. I think there's another one on the other side holding that bracket on there, though it might be easier just to unplug all the plugs. So all right, so I think there are 4 bolts that hold this on. They are 8mm. 1, 2, 3, and then I got a socket on that 4th one up there. I think that's all that hold this on. We'll see. I'm gonna go ahead and remove these, and then we've obviously got hoses that are attached to it that we need to disconnect, but I'm gonna disconnect all these first, and then that way I can hopefully move this around a little bit and get disconnect anything that's connected to it a little bit easier. I've got it broken free. I removed those 4 bolts, and then I hit it with a rubber mallet to break it free. So now it's off of the engine. There's a hose right there that needs to be disconnected. Just move the clamp up and then twist the hose off. And then I think there's 2 over here in this area that need to be removed, and then that plug. But I think doing this one first will give us more play to get to these ones over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that one. So I've got this out of here. I don't know how well it's going to show up on the camera, but you can kind of see that looks like it's the failure point right there where it's been leaking coolant. So I did not disconnect this because I didn't need to. I thought maybe I could leave this bolted on there, but I wasn't able to. So the last thing that I disconnected was that bolt to free this so that I could manipulate this a little bit better. But there was a plug right here that you needed to disconnect as well. The plug that's in here in this bracket. Disconnected a hose right here, and that was it as far as the getting this out of there. So now I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up and replace these gaskets and clean up the engine and then get this back on here. But I pulled it out through this area right here, and I just kind of rotated it as I pulled it out so that it would clear everything and get out of there. If you haven't already, you're also going to want to drain your oil. Here is the replacement part number that I'm using. And I just got this from AutoZone. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on. I'm going to go ahead and try to get this back down in there. I disconnected that little auxiliary pump from it. I'm going to try to be careful not to touch anything against these new gaskets. Auxiliary pump, which I disconnected, it's going to be easier to feed it in through here. Now that I've got it back into position, I'm going to go ahead and start reassembling everything. So I'm going to put this auxiliary pump back on. So I'll feed this down in here. Got to get that hose back behind here. So now we're just going to start putting these bolts back in for that pump, the two little 8mm. So I've plugged that one plug-in back in that was on top. You can kind of see it right there. I got those two bolts in on that bracket, and then I got that hose back in that runs from there up to the top of this. So now I'm going to start bolting this back up the engine. Alright, so I've got it all bolted back up, and I've got the two plugs plugged back in and all the hoses reconnected. So now I've just basically got to put the rest of this all back together. So I'm going to start putting all this back together and then come back over to the exhaust.